This is the second part of the introduction to trauma. In the first part, I gave the four positives and four challenges of becoming trauma informed and having that lens when we're working with people. In this one, I want to talk more very briefly about a couple of things related to why is this so important. First, I am going to make it aside. I am going to use a couple of terms interchangeably. I'm going to use adverse childhood experiences. The abbreviation is ACEs, and I'm going to use trauma interchangeably. There are reasons why they're not exactly identical, but they're close enough. And I'll get into that later in a different video, what the difference between ACEs and trauma actually is. But neurologically, they tend to affect people very similarly and pretty much identically. So, why is this topic so important to understand? I had mentioned the link between behavior and mental illness in the first video. There are some other things as educators that are really important for us to know. There was a study by Nadine Burke Harris, our first Surgeon General in the state of California, who does a lot of work with adverse childhood experiences. A study that she did found that the students who had experienced 4 or more ACEs were 32 times more likely to be found to have there was a study in Washington state that looked at their kids who had been suspended or expelled and found that almost 80% of them had experienced 4 or more ACEs. So we see these very strong connections between childhood adversity and both behavior and academic progress in schools. In fact, most kids who come to alternative education are going to have what we call a high ACE score. Typically, the ACE questionnaire is 10 questions. The tipping point is 4. When you have somebody who has had 4 or more, you start to see these statistically significant changes in behavior and learning. Now, that's the here and now. We also have to look at the adult effects of trauma. And that's where it gets really troubling because, yeah, we might be able to get these kids through the K-12 system, but what happens next as adults if we don't really work to address what is driving that behavior? And so we see that the likelihood of incarceration as adults is much greater. Gang affiliation, my area of study, domestic terrorism, all have strong links with early childhood trauma. Dementia and Alzheimer's are becoming more and more correlated with high ACE scores in childhood. So childhood adversity has these effects later on in life. And once we start to look at the brain, that starts to make a lot more sense how something that happened in early childhood could affect someone in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. We also see that there are effects related to high risk behaviors that typically go along with a traumatic childhood. So that could be early pregnancy. That can also mean violent criminal behavior, explosive criminal behavior. When we look at people who have had 6 or more ACEs, we correlate that with a 20-year reduction in lifespan, mainly because their lifestyle choices are harmful or dangerous, and the odds eventually catch up with them. The bottom line is that when we're looking at trauma, what we are doing might change the trajectory of a person's life and keep them from having negative outcomes later on. So this is super important.